Hello, I'm Stefan Steiner. Welcome to an introduction to watfactory. Watfactory is an online virtual manufacturing environment developed by my colleague Jock Mackay and myself over the last number of years. We've used it successfully both in a university course on process improvement and also in 3-day industrial short courses. The idea behind watfactory is that it's a simulation of a manufacturing process, more specifically a manufacturing process to produce camshafts. For those of you who aren't familiar with a camshaft, this is what one looks like. Camshafts play a critical role in an internal combustion engine in that they, as it rotates, they open and close exhaust and fuel valves at the appropriate time. If you think about a camshaft, there are many important characteristics of the final product. There are things like the journal diameters, the geometry of the lobes, the overall straightness of the rod, and so on. For the purposes of watfactory, we're going to focus on a single output measure that we're just going to denote as Y300. The Y300 value inside watfactory is measured from a nominal value so that the target is 0. And later on, when you log in to your version of watfactory, you'll be given engineering specification limits for the Y300 output measure. In watfactory, management has identified a problem with too much variability in the final output of Y300. There have been customer complaints involving both too large and too small camshafts. So imagine yourself as the engineer responsible for this process. So your goal inside watfactory will be to try and find a way of changing the process so that it reduces the variability in that final output Y300. More specifically, you'll be looking for a way to make the process produce all camshafts within the specification limits that are given later. To do this, you'll be given a budget of 10,000 virtual dollars to spend in looking for a solution. And I'll explain later on how this money is spent inside watfactory. I'll also show later the online interface for watfactory that allows you to collect data and conduct empirical investigations to learn more about how the process works. Here's what the process map for watfactory looks like. At first glance, it's relatively complicated, but if you think about the process, you see that there are three major processing steps. In the first part of the process, the camshafts are assembled. So imagine the rod, the journals, and the lobes all being put together. The second processing step then is a welding step, and then finally this is followed by a heat treatment step. Note that the final output, Y300, is measured after the heat treatment stage, just before you send it to your customer. The same output characteristic can also be measured after the welding stage and after the assembly stage, and those are denoted as Y200 and Y100 respectively. Also notice that there are many inputs to this process, so there are many things that could have an influence on the output characteristic. There are 60 so-called varying inputs, denoted X1 through 60. As the name suggests, these are inputs that change as the process operates. And on the next slide, I'll give you some examples. In addition, there are 30 fixed inputs denoted as Z1 through 30 or Z1 through 30. And these inputs are normally fixed. They do not change as the process operates, but they can be changed. And later on, when we start thinking about solutions, these are the kinds of things that you need to look at for making the process better. Other bits of process information that you already have are that this process runs 5 days a week for 3 shifts, 1 part per minute. And so it produces about 1,440 camshafts per day. I mentioned earlier the varying inputs, X1 through 60. These inputs have a variety of characteristics. They come in both continuous types and categorical types. So for instance, X25 corresponds to the operator in the assembly step, and this will be a categorical variable labeled 1 through 5 to represent the 5 different operators that are acting in the assembly stage of the process. Whereas X50 is the heating time and the heat treatment step, is a continuous variable. It has many possible values. From the process map, you also saw that the varying inputs X1 through 60 operate at certain stages in the process, and you can see which variables, which inputs act in what stage. So consider this part of your background process knowledge about how watfactory works before you start. In addition, for some of the variables, you'll get some information about how they act over time. So for instance, again, if you look at X25, operators, there are 5 operators, and the operators change only once per shift. Whereas X50, the heating time, is a variable that changes very quickly over time and can be different, quite different, for different camshafts that are produced sequentially. There's more information about these varying inputs inside watfactory and various PDF documents that summarize this information in more detail. There's also information about the fixed inputs. You'll be given names, and again you have information from the process map about which process stage the various fixed inputs act in. You'll also be given the current level of that fixed input. Remember, they are fixed while the process operates. In addition to the current level, you're also given the feasible range of values, the possible values that this particular fixed input can take. And those are, again, given in PDF documents that are obtained within watfactory. Now, to interact with watfactory, what you'll need to do is register and get a login ID and password. And on the slide is showing you what the login page looks like. The website is given also on the slide, but the easiest way probably to find this site is to just Google watfactory. So once you have the appropriate login and password information, you can log in. Note that with your login credentials, you'll be directed towards a different version of the process than everyone else will see. If you prefer just to play around, just to get an idea of how things work in watfactory, you can always use the guest account. And that's what's described or shown in these slides. The guest account is available to anyone, and you can do as many investigations as you'd like on the guest account. Though note that the results for the guest account will be different than what you will see when you run these same investigations on your own personal version of watfactory. Once you log in, you'll be directed towards the team homepage, which gives you all the relevant information for your team. In particular, if you're looking at the top of the screen, top of the login team homepage, inside the big yellow box there will be given all the specific information to your team. So you'll be given, of course, your team number and your ID, but also some information about the time, so how much time has elapsed since the start of this process. At the very beginning, you'll be in week 1, Monday, and shift number 2. And as time passes, as you conduct investigations and observe the process, this time will pass. You also given information about the specification limits for your particular version of watfactory. In this case, you see for the guest account, the specifications are minus 14 to 14. And perhaps most importantly, you'll see information about how much money you've spent searching for a solution. Again, the starting budget of $10,000, and you can see how much money you have remaining. In this case, you see that the amount of money is quite small in the sense that you've spent a lot. And this is because the guest account is open to everyone, and people have been playing around and trying various kinds of investigations. If you scroll to the bottom of the team homepage, and at the bottom of the slide shows you further information that you can obtain about your particular version of watfactory. What you can see there is you're allowed to look at data from any previous investigation that you've already run. And you also see a history log showing you all the previous investigations, in addition to any solutions that you've tried. Finally, if you like, you can also change your login password. Note that I'm not showing you a live version of watfactory here, but if you click on any of the underlined elements in watfactory, they're linked to those PDF pages that I talked about. So for instance, in the top of the slide here, you see that underlined introduction. That will link to an introduction to watfactory on a written format that you can look at your leisure. And there are 3 different additional documents provided to give you more information about watfactory. So there's one about the introduction. It gives you much of the information I'm giving you here. There's also one document on the diagnostic journey or the search for the cause. It gives you more information about the varying inputs and so on, and the kinds of investigations you can run. And then finally, there's also one PDF document that talks about solutions and gives you more information about the various fixed inputs inside watfactory. If we go down into the middle of the team homepage, this is where the heart of the information or the interface lies, is where you can interact and ask for various kinds of data and various kinds of investigations. So you can see that there are a large variety of empirical investigations that you can conduct. There are 8 different kinds of investigations, including observational type investigations, where you simply observe the process in action and perhaps measure some outputs and some additional inputs that you don't normally measure. In addition, there are investigations that are experimental in nature, where you might deliberately set the level of one or more of the inputs to the process just to observe what might happen to the output. There are also some additional types of investigations called offline experimental investigations, including